the last book of the Bible, called the book of Revelation, also called the book of the Apocalypse. St. John the Evangelist wrote this book having had a vision of the end of the world. And there he writes in chapter 21, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away." In times of pandemic, in the great times of trial throughout the world, mankind has given more thought to the end of the world, the annihilation of all things in the second coming of Christ. And perhaps our thoughts once in a while go to the apocalypse in the present virus situation. It's very difficult to think of that, of everything in the world being annihilated, coming to an end and ceasing to exist. We think of a beautiful church like St. Mary's here in Remsen, of no stone being laid upon another and it being knocked down and annihilated and wiped out. But being Christians, we know that was this church to survive to those times, not everything in here would be wiped out. Of course, Jesus in the tabernacle in his second coming would remain living and would bring the people with him to heaven that deserved heaven, casting the others into hell. So the bodies of people will survive. And there's 6 small fragments in this church that would also be taken to heaven. I wonder if you know what those 6 small fragments are. Think, if you can, what they might be. I'll give you 5 seconds. Did you think of what they might be? Well, we know from our creed that we pray that we believe in the resurrection of the dead, that at the second coming of Christ, the souls of the faithful, the communion of saints, will be reunited with their bodies. And so there's 6 fragments of the bodies of the saints in this church. And at the second coming of Christ, they'll be reunited with the soul of the person, and will spend eternity with body and soul in heaven. These 6 tiny fragments we call relics. A relic means a leftover, something left behind. And we have 6 first-class relics in our church. A first-class relic is a portion of the body of a saint, perhaps that saint's hair, a piece of tooth or bone, maybe even a drop of blood, that has been preserved since the saint died and is venerated and respected and placed in our churches today. We have 6 of those first-class relics in St. Mary's Church. You might ask, what do these classes have to do with anything? Well, the first class, as I said, is part of the saint's body. A second-class relic is part of the saint's clothing, maybe something the saint used in his office or in his study, in his ministry, in her life in a convent. Something that touched the saint would be a second-class relic. A third-class relic is any item of devotion, such as maybe a rosary, that would be held up and touched to a relic, becomes itself a relic and worthy of respect and honor. So we have those 3 classes of relics that we venerate. You might ask what veneration means. Veneration just means to show respect and to show honor. So we can respect and honor the relics of saints simply with a smile, an acknowledgement, maybe stopping to say a short prayer in the presence of the relic, just to have a general sense of reverence and honor for a relic. And some people ask, where do we get this in the Catholic Church? Well, the first real hint of this is the patriarch Joseph, the favorite son of Jacob, who was later named Israel, one of the 12 sons of Israel. Joseph, you remember, was sold into slavery by his brothers and rose to power in Egypt, where he brought the family down during a time of famine. And Joseph made it clear that he wanted his bones taken back to the promised land once they were freed from slavery in Egypt. So in Exodus chapter 13, we read, "Moses took Joseph's bones with him because Joseph had abjured the children of Israel, saying, 'God shall visit you, carry out my bones from hence with you.'" So in other words, the body of Joseph was very much venerated and respected, and his bones were returned to the promised land for burial. In second book of Kings, we read the story of Elisha. We're learning of the prophet Elisha. And after Elisha had died and had been buried, we read this in the second book of Kings, chapter 13. Some who were burying a man cast his body in the tomb of Elisha. When the corpse touched the bones of Elisha, the man came to life and stood upon his feet. So these bones of Elisha would be a first-class relic. When the body of the dead man touched the bones, he was resurrected. And so there seemed to be a power that came through the bones of Elisha. We also have indications in the New Testament. In the book of Acts, the first book after the Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, in chapter 19, we read this. And God worked more than the usual miracles by the hand of Paul, so that even handkerchiefs and aprons were carried from his body to the sick, and the diseases left them, and the evil spirits went out. Here we have second-class relics, items of cloth that had touched St. Paul that were used for healing miracles. And so we see that there's a certain power in the relics that can affect miracles, and that we, of course, respect and honor. So you might say, okay, where are these relics in our church? Where are these 6 pieces of the saint that have survived and that we venerate and honor? There's 2 general locations, and in order to show you the first, I have to do a little digging, so please excuse me for a moment. I've taken what's called an altar stone from the altar of St. Joseph behind me. I'm not a rock person, but this would be granite or marble, one of the 2, I would believe. Very heavy. It's called an altar stone, and we also call this a reliquary. A reliquary is anything that holds or contains a relic. So we see this big square. It's got 4 crosses on each corner and 1 in the middle, and then down at the bottom is a smaller square that is cemented in, and this would be where the relic is contained. So I'll give you a little bit of a close-up. So there's a first-class relic in this little cement square. We do not know the identity of the saints that are in these altar stones. Canon law says that the identification is supposed to be posted in the sacristy, and at some point we apparently lost that documentation. So we do not know who these 3 saints are. There's 1 altar stone here at the St. Joseph altar, 1 on the north side in the altar of St. Mary, and of course 1 altar stone in the high altar front and center of church. So again, we don't know the identity of these saints, unfortunately. However, we still respect and venerate them and honor them in their presence among us. So that's 3 of the relics, and to find the other 3, we come to this container here. This glass container used to be an ambry. An ambry is what houses the holy oils within the church. Last year, I believe it was, we got an ambry that better fits the architecture of St. Mary's Church, so now the ambry is on the north side at St. Mary's altar, and we converted this former ambry into a relic case. So we have 3 relics, as you can see, top to bottom, that are housed in this relic case, and I'll grab the first one. So this would be another example of a reliquary. This one is gold. It is formed to be a stand. It's got the ornate gold work around the relic itself, a little door in the back for access. And this would be St. Francis of Assisi, one of the most famous male saints in the history of the church, probably the most famous after St. Joseph, the foster father of Jesus. And so we're very honored to have the presence of St. Francis of Assisi in our church, especially since for over 115 years, members of the Franciscan order taught here as sisters in our school. So it's very appropriate that we have St. Francis among us. He lived a life of poverty, taught us how to love the poor, and taught us how to put God first. So this is Francis of Assisi, and I'll give you a close-up. In the bottom of the case, in a silver reliquary, much smaller, is a relic of one of the most famous female saints in the history of the church, Saint Therese of Lisieux. Saint Therese is also represented in our church in a statue on the north side under the big arch that goes over the top of the altar. The statue on the left is Saint Therese of Lisieux, and this would be her first-class relic. Saint Therese knew very, very few people in her life. She was a cloistered sister, and despite the fact that she died at a very young age, I think she was 23, she became one of the most famous saints in the history of the church because of her writings on spirituality that many, many people use. She taught us the way of humility, the small way, to make ourselves small and humble before God so that our great God could reach down and lift us up. So this great saint, of course, we're very honored to have her in our presence as well, teaching us the way of humility. So I'll give you a close-up of Saint Therese of Lisieux. And then third, last but not least, we have Saint Pius X. Pius was the Pope from 1903 to 1914 when World War I started. He would have been Pope when this church was built between 1903 and 1904. Also, those were the very earliest years of the Diocese of Sioux City. Pope Pius was a liturgical expert. He greatly loved the Mass, taught people about the Mass, did many reforms for the Mass. And if you are a first communicant, you should be thankful to him because he took the age of First Communion down from the age of 12 down to the age of 7. So he wanted frequent reception of Holy Communion and also communion at an earlier age. So this is Pope Pius X. I've also brought with me a relic that I possess in my own home that I have in my chapel. This is Mother Teresa of Calcutta. A couple years ago I met a priest who had a light blue cleric shirt on, and I asked him, "Are you a member of Mother Teresa's order?" And he said, "Yes, I am. My name is Father Belisario." And so I said, "Father, would you tell me about Mother Teresa? Did you meet her?" And he said, "Yes, I knew her. I ministered with her in Calcutta." And he said, he told me about her and told me some stories about her. And he said to me, "Do you love Mother Teresa?" And I said, "Sure I do." I said, "Not as much as my wife does, but yes, I love her." And he said, "Well, I would like to give you a relic of Mother Teresa." So a couple months later in the mail, I received this relic. I don't have very good eyesight, but if you have a magnifying glass, you can see that this is Mother Teresa's hair. You can see the little strands of hair if you get a close enough look. Mother Teresa, of course, taught us also to respect and love the poor, and of course, one of the more famous modern saints who died not all that long ago and now has been canonized. So I'll give you a little close-up of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. I've also got this crucifix that I wear. Maybe you've seen me wearing it teaching or in ministry. This crucifix contains more than would appear at first sight. You take a little screw on the bottom and unscrew it. And when you open it up on the inside, you can see that there's 11 relics within. Among these relics are St. Christopher, St. Blaise. We bless throats in February, and St. Blaise's relic is in here, as well as St. Ursula, and 8 other saints for a total of 11. A lot of times when you see a relic collection like this, It's got a group of saints such as martyrs or teachers or founders of orders or something like that. I don't know what this particular grouping is, but I hope to research that someday as well and to figure out what this group of saints is. Lastly, I'd like to mention that if you ever want to stop and see in one stop where you could stop and see many relics, if you're ever headed to Kansas City on I-29, in northwest Missouri, in Clive, Missouri, not very far off the interstate, there's a cloister of Benedictine nuns, and they have a relic room with over 550 first-class relics. It'd be a great place to stop to see some relics and to venerate them. It's amazing to see. They have the largest relic that I've ever seen. It's Saint Beatrice, and she was a very early saint from the catacombs in Rome. They have her face is there encased in wax, and then there's a fake body made out of wax, but within the chest of that body is a pouch that contains her bones. So that's the largest relic I've ever seen, and you can see that as well if you would ever stop in Clive, Missouri. So hopefully you know a little bit more than when we started about relics. We've hopefully learned how to respect and venerate relics when we see them, when we pass by them. We thank God for the communion of saints that we look forward to joining.